17. Before Representative Flowers make a motion, I want to just say that House Bill 5417 is an attempt to create the Isolation Confinement Restriction Act, and that's what this bill is about. Representative Flowers moves that House Bill 54. Okay, Representative Cassidy in the chair, and
What's the bill number?
5417.
There's no amendment.
Amendment, yes. As amended, right.
Representative?
It was adopted.
In the other day.
Right.
Representative Flowers moves House Bill 5417 as amended to pass, and I'm assuming because you're holding your code that you want to open the roll and vote yes?
It's being reported as voting aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Harris votes aye.
Harris votes aye. Mayfield votes aye. Representative Ford, would you like to hang on?
Just a question of the chair. Is this the only business we're doing today?
Yes.
All right, and may I inquire of the sponsor how it is that the bill got here?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm just curious, given the procedural aspects. Wasn't this in crim or no?
It was.
Okay, so help me out. I'm a Republican. I don't know how you guys do your thing behind the scenes. How is it that this bill switched committees?
It was not placed in the right committee in the first place.
Then why did we have a hearing? Why didn't you move it to the right committee in the first place? With all due respect.
Because I don't move bills out of committees.
But you moved them to the right committee. I'm just curious because
I just fight for the bills to be in the right committee, and I finally got to the fight on our side. No, she's not.
all right, because I hear you, but restorative justice is a wonderful term. I'm just not sure this bill wasn't in the right committee, which is maybe why it went where it went. We had that procedure, now we are where we are. It just, again, I don't get all the inside stuff you guys get to do, being the majority, but it's a curious procedure. Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Did you want to continue, Representative Ford?
Oh, yes, I'd like to
I would
present the
have moved
bill.
stuff out of different committees
You want to do it too?
for a whole bunch of bills.
So I'd like to present the bill as amended. So House Bill 5417, Madam Chair, as amended with House Amendment number 1 is a government replacement amendment that creates the Isolation Confinement Restriction Act. And it does a few things. But if it's okay with you, Madam Chair, I just have a question of IDOT. I know they're here. And is it okay if they answer a question or two before I start?
Is IDOC prepared to respond to the sponsor's question?
I guess I'll see you.
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Well, he hasn't asked it yet. I'm asking if you're prepared to
Yes, we're
respond.
prepared.
Yes, okay.
I would like to ask a few questions of IDOT. If you could step to the mic, that'd be great. Go.
Well, I have I'm Michael Lane, Department of Corrections. I will fill out a slip. We have people here ready to testify, but I just wanted to point out to the committee before we got started that, you know, the bill was in crim the other day, and with the agreement to continue to work on it, and I believe that we had a meeting immediately after committee to continue to work on the bill. So I was also surprised to see that it ended up in this committee today, because I thought we were going to be meeting on this for the next several weeks. But with that said, I do have experts here ready to testify today.
So let's speak to working on it. That's
Sure.
what we're doing now, working on it. And after we finish working on it today, I hope that we can offer some compromise to move forward on this issue. Is that acceptable in your?
I believe that I had said in your office last week when we met after committee that we are concerned about rushing a bill as far as, you know, getting it out there this week. But yes, you have our word that we will continue to sit down with.
Is the director here?
The director is not here today.
Okay. I asked my question. Can you tell me, tell us the rules of solitary confinement as
Sure.
it is today? What type of rules are we? Yeah.
Sure, I'm going to introduce our director. We're going to have our director of operations for the department and our policy advisor for the department. So.
morning.
Good morning.
I'm Mike Atchison, Chief of Operations.
So the question is, could you tell us the rules for solitary confinement today, which the question is, how do you determine who, when, and why people are placed in solitary confinement in Illinois, or administrative detention, or however you want to call it?
It can be as short or as long as you like it to be. It's about a 50 or 60 page rule called Department Rule 504 that governs disciplinary procedures, gives due process, disciplinary segregation being one of the possible penalties. It also governs grievance processes. So to answer your question directly, there are a series of offenses, charges that an offender can be charged with, whether it be, they're ranged from 400 series minor infractions to serious violent assaults, which is a 100 series infraction. There are...
These are internal codes for
Yes.
offenses committed within the facility?
Correct. You can liken them to, you know, a criminal charge. Albeit, these are administrative charges. They're not criminal. They can turn into a criminal charge if they do meet that threshold. When an offender does something that appears to violate one of these charges, whether it is assaulting an officer or destroying a cell or lighting a fire or simply not having an ID card, which is a very minor one, there is staff are trained to know what the corresponding charge that applies. They write a ticket, which you can, again, liken to, say, a traffic ticket.
So you do have rules?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, very detailed rules.
Okay, have you read the bill that's before us today?
I have.
What don't you like about it?
There are aspects, quite a few aspects of the bill that seriously diminish the department's ability to separate the most violent offenders from the general population. And I stress the word separate. Solitary, isolation, neither of those words exist in any of our policies. Probably haven't for 100
So
years.
could you be more specific about what you don't like about the proposal?
The limitation on the number of days that we can separate an offender from general population, limiting to 5 in 150 days, is even in comparing to other states, their maximum range from 90 to 360 days. And I'm only talking about the most serious offenses here. We have a very small portion of our population that is also the most violent portion of our population. We have an obligation to protect other offenders, let them rehabilitate, let them do their time, so to speak, and the staff that work there.
So do you think that your system deserves improvement?
Yes, sir.
How long will it take you to improve it?
As a matter of fact, we have we are on the verge of submitting sweeping changes to the departmental rule that governs the disciplinary process through to JCAR, which dramatically drops the maximum segregation penalties for almost all of the charges. As a matter of fact, if I can be so far to say that all of the 300 series and 400 series charges have gone from, some of them had about 3 months maximum seg, they're going to 0.
I'm glad you said JCAR because we did have a hearing in judiciary and one of the members in JCAR, a member of JCAR said that they probably would rather see a bill and a law passed to help you administer your new rules. What do you think of that?
Well, I don't know the person that said that. I've never heard.
I don't think that's accurate.
Our rules are driven directly from statute, the Code of Corrections, and that being a derivative of the Code of Corrections, we stay in line with what we are obligated to do, and we, through that JCAR process for the last year, making changes in the whole process, we are improving it dramatically. So legislation, to answer your question, sir, is, I don't know that it would make it, I think, a little bit more convoluted because you have a lot of mixing and matching to do.
Representative Sandak had a follow-up on
Just
that.
a clarification, Representative. I was in the same committee.
Hang
and
on,
I'm-
Carver, you're voting yes?
I vote yes.
Okay. Representative Carver votes yes.
Yeah, just to clarify, I was in the same meeting. I'm on JCAR with Representative Tepetti, and I think he was a little less clear than you suggested. And I'm happy to talk with him at any time. He and I both take our responsibilities on JCAR very seriously. Whenever a department or agency comes to us with a new set of rules or changing rules, we take that responsibility seriously. We do not usually get legislation with new rules. Occasionally it occurs, but rules and how departments interact and engage, and including the Department of Corrections, if they're making changes, that process ought to go.
If you review the notes, you'll see that the representative stated that it would make sense to have some policy coming from the chamber.
Well, I didn't say, he didn't say some policy, but a whole new bill, or changing.
Well, we're arguing about something that we shouldn't argue. I simply said that I believe that the
I'm not arguing, I'm just
representative
making sure the record's clear.
It's
on that.
clear
Okay.
that the representative said that he believes that it would be in order to have some type of bill passed by the House of Representatives and the Senate to be given to work with JCAR. That's what was said. I know that may not be verbatim, but that's to the nature of his comment.
Are there other questions for the witness?
Yes.
Okay.
So let me ask you a few more questions. What are the number of prisoners in disciplinary segregation, administrative detention, and investigation segregation by prison and by race?
I don't have the breakdown by demographics in front of me, but I can tell you that our total confinement, which includes all those subcategories you mentioned, is at 1,978, 1,978. That's down almost 30% from a little over a year ago.
And so are you saying that the Department of Corrections does not need the help of this body to improve solitary confinement? That's what you're saying?
I pride ourselves in our ability to recognize when change needs to be made, and we have made those changes over the past year and are getting ready to push them out to JCAR, and I think they will make a dramatic effect. So,
What's your number one pride and change that you've made in the Department of Corrections?
reducing reliance on segregation as a corrective action.
Okay. So what are the hours per week the prisoners are out of their cell while in confinement, solitary confinement?
In segregation, or
Both.
ranging from 21 to 23 hours per week, depending on they have types of passes they have to go on, things
So
like that.
if they're in solitary confinement, they're out of that environment for 22 hours?
Oh no, I'm sorry, the inverse. They're in segregation. They get currently between 5 and 9 hours of yard a week.
Is that clumped
That's-
all together?
No, it's just divided up by every day or two. They'll get an hour or two on the yard. There are reasons to come out of the cells, recently going from one shower a week to 3. There are passes they go on, and it's hard to really, especially, from offender to offender, they may be out for mental health treatment for intervention or something like that. So, but to answer your question, 22 hours is general, probably a close approximation. Currently.
That's Alan.
Okay, so you want,
It would be
you want to hear from proponents now?
Yes.
Okay. Let's start with Alan Mills.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee,
State your name for the record.
sorry, Alan Mills, M-I-L-L-S. My name is, I am the Executive Director of the Altown People's Law Center. We don't have to
I'm going to stop
guess.
you for 1 second. I need to add Representative Monique Davis to the roll. Sorry, go ahead.
We don't have to guess as to who's in segregation and why. The Department of Corrections has necessarily provided a nice chart, which is in the blue packets, which I see were not distributed, but are sitting in the back table. If you can hand those out, there's a nifty little chart, which was prepared by the Illinois Department of Corrections about 5 years ago. And those are the most current records they have according to the FOIA that we filed. They list the 31 reasons that people are sent to segregation or were sent to segregation that year. They sent a total, or they wrote a total of 12,332 disciplinary reports, which ended up sending people to segregation. I'm looking at the one-page chart. And 60% of those were for those 300 and 400 level offenses. Only 4 of them, violation of rules, which is some internal rule, not any of the major things we just talked about, disobeying a direct order, unauthorized movement, and insolence. Low-level offenses, that accounted for 60% of those people. The violent assaults that he's talking about, that's way down at the bottom, number 30. There are only 9 of those, of the 12,332 people that they sent to segregation that year. But they're only talking about disciplinary segregation. This bill goes further. This bill deals with not only the 2,000 people that he mentioned who were in disciplinary segregation, but also deals with everybody in the Department of Corrections who was locked down in cells looking like the one on the chart here, and this is Menard Correctional Center. It's a 4.5 by 9.5 foot cell in which 2 people are held 22 to 24 hours a day currently, even in general population. So these are people who have done nothing wrong. They're there only because the department, it's convenient for their administrative reasons not to let them out. So most of the people who are locked up 22 to 24 hours a day are in there not for disciplinary reasons, but just because they're in maximum security prisons and there's nothing to do.
So you're referring to, the chart that you're working from is 2008 numbers, correct?
It does not have a date on it. The study was put up.
So what I'm looking at is this.
Yes, I'm sorry, you're absolutely right. Yes, 2008 numbers. I'm sorry.
So I'd like to ask the Director of Operations if that meshes with what you're experiencing now, because you've said it's down from that. How do your policy changes make those? Alan, you don't need to step away. I just want to get that comparison. I know this is an awkward committee room. Sorry.
That's all right.
I'm sorry, what was the question again exactly?
So Mr. Mills shared with us, and it's perhaps not fair that you don't have this in front of you, but
I'm familiar with I probably was even seeing this, so how we got to where we are today and with the reduced numbers, which if we broke this down, if we all had access to the by charge number of infractions that resulted in segregation, it would be dramatically decreased, improved, however you want to look at it. That's even before any of these proposed changes to the departmental rule. There is a high level, as I mentioned before, there's a due process. You go, you get a ticket, it's not guilty as charged and stamped. You go before an adjustment committee that will hear the offender's side, they will read the ticket, they will weigh the evidence, witnesses have the opportunity to be presented, and then the adjustment committee makes a recommendation to the warden, and the warden has the final determination as to what the discipline is. Now, that same discretion, anytime you have a wide range of discretion, can lead to high level of use of a type of discipline such as segregation, and that's recognized. That's why we're working so hard on this.
This says there were north of 12,000 prisoners released from segregation in 2008. You're saying now the number is about 1,900?
Right.
I'm saying now that there are only 1,900 in segregation right now.
This is a rolling number.
So that 12,000 is not individuals, that's 12,000 in and out.
Yeah, I think
Right, so it's not in a static time. That's the number of people went in over an entire year.
So it could be the same person multiple times?
It could be.
Got it. Representative Standack?
Is there anything, maybe this is Mr. Mills, because when I saw your chart and I was looking at what you were suggesting, not suggesting, stating that there were violations of rules versus real violent assaults. Is the ratio the same now?
We don't.
Are there any numbers that can help us show if this breakdown is a snapshot in time currently?
Not that the Illinois Department of Corrections shared with us when we filed an FOA asking for those numbers. They said they did not exist. This was the most recent numbers they said they had.
And do you mind addressing that? Because obviously you're anecdotally telling us there have been dramatic changes. Is there any snapshot or estimate you can give us that correlates to this?
It may not have existed. I don't know how they answered the FOIA, but it could have been probably over. They could generate the numbers and make sure it's accurate and get it to whoever the requester is, yes. We can make
So
some
let me just ask a question. So looking at the sheet that Mr. Mills gave us, is it fair to say that generally your experience is it's violation of rules, disobeying the direct order, unauthorized movement, etc., versus arson or violent assaults, whether on a guard or another inmate?
By volume, yes,
Okay.
yes. Now, and they come with smaller,
They correlate to smaller
terms of
incidents.
segregation,
Sure.
shorter terms, and they just happen more often because it's human nature to say, I'm not going over there, or I'm refusing to do that.
Versus a violent act.
Yeah, thankfully,
Right.
that's the case. However, if you recall, I mentioned 300 and 400 series charges.
Correct.
They will carry no segregation when this JCAR proposal is done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Question from Representative Davis.
I would like to know, good afternoon or good morning, I'd like to know how many hours does a person have to wait before a person is allowed to come and visit an inmate? You know, I've heard some people have waited for hours to visit and then being told they won't even get to see them.
I can only, if there are anyone turned away, it would be because there was such a long line possibly. A bus came down and then they arrived late in the day and the visiting hours closed before they were allowed to visit. But it is a matter of routine that we make exceptions and keep the visiting room open. So I am originally from Menard. I came up through Menard, and I remember big Saturdays where Smitty's bus service would come, and there would be several visitors, but they'd be there by 8 or 10 o'clock in the morning, and everybody, they may have to wait in line to have room in the visiting room to have their visit. But I can say that I've not heard of anyone being turned away because they had to wait in line too long and then we closed shop.
Well, I have received complaints against that the person has driven up from Chicago, Illinois, and waited for hours to visit and then being told that there's no real reason,
Sure.
except you have a reason that we don't know about.
There could be that. I mean, we do post the visiting hours on the website, and they're fairly well known. It's in some places they go to 5 or 6 o'clock at night. Some are 4:30. We do try to make it public information so no one makes a trip late in the afternoon, assuming that they're going to be able to come in on a visit at 7 o'clock at night.
No, you're trying to say they come late. That's not true.
Okay, well, I didn't know what
They
you
come,
said.
no, they come as soon as they're allowed inside. They come hours, early, waiting to get in there to see someone. So I really would appreciate not having those complaints.
I
would
agree.
appreciate not having those complaints.
Sure, I agree with that.
Representative?
You have more to add, Mr. Miller?
I do, and
Okay.
let me just start where Representative left off. I was in Stateville yesterday, and I waited as a legal visit, even though at Stateville the lawyers go to the front of the line. I waited an hour for my client to have a visit. So those people who were in the back of the line who didn't get the cut at the very front of the line, I guarantee you they waited way more than an hour. And that was in Stateville, which ends visits, by the way, at 2:30 in the afternoon, not 4 or 5, but 2:30 in the afternoon. Illinois is not the only state that's dealing with this issue of solitary confinement. I circulated by email the gray box, a video. And in that video, the state of Colorado makes the best defense that there was of solitary confinement. But since that video came out, the new director of the Department of Corrections on his first day in office spent a weekend in solitary and came out and said, we're not doing this to people. This is inhumane. And Colorado doesn't lock people up 24 hours a day anymore. But I want to go back to general populations.
Can you tell me what they do? What they've replaced segregation?
They let them out. They don't replace, we're not talking about replacing segregation.
Okay.
We're
No,
talking
what Colorado
about,
changed to is what I'm asking.
they let people out of their cells. We're not saying in this bill that it ends disciplinary segregation.
Got it.
We're not saying that it ends administrative detention. We're saying let people out of their cells so they're not in these tiny little boxes 24 hours a day. In general population, I met with Gerard Schultz yesterday at Stateville. He's in general population now at Stateville. And he gave me his schedule. He gets out of his cell for 2 meals a day, but only 15 minutes each. So it's a total of half an hour a day out of his cell. On a typical day, that's all he gets out of his cell. So there's 2 15-minute meals. Twice a week, he gets a shower. That's about 15 minutes each of those showers. That's another half hour. 2 times a week, he goes to yard, as Mr. Atkinson said. It's supposed to be 2.5 hours, but it ends up usually being about 2 hours because they're understaffed and enough guards to stay there the whole time. That's it. So he's out of his cell approximately 7 hours out of the week, spread over all 7 days. Most days he's in there 24 hours a day, other than the 2 meals. So he's spending 23 hours a day in segregation, which this bill defines as solitary and says even though he's done nothing wrong, he's still locked up 23 hours a day. And what this bill says is you can still punish people, you can still put people in segregation, you can still isolate them from the general population, but for 4 hours a day you have to let them out of their cell. What can they do during that 4 hours? They can certainly go on a visit if they have a visit. Maybe they just sit in the day room and watch a TV. Maybe they mingle outside. Maybe they go to yard. Maybe they go to mental health care, like he said. Maybe that's whatever it is. They can do whatever they want with them. They just can't lock them in these tiny little cells 24 hours a day with nothing to do. Because as you can see from this, 2 people can stand in this cell, but they can't actually both move at the same time in this cell. The fronts of these cells, which is the second picture that's up there, the fronts of those cells are solid doors. So there's no light and no air in these cells either. You know, there's no window in these cells. And there's a solid steel door. These are not the traditional bars with a window in the back that you might see on TV. That's not what we have in Illinois. We have closed, airless boxes which people spend 24 hours a day in. Let me tell you about the violent assaults though. Again, I met with Patrice Daniels yesterday at State Building. He received one of those violent assaults several years ago. It may even have been 2008. His violent assault was he's a seriously mentally ill person. And he was in one of these closed front cells. It was not quite the same. It had little pinholes in the solid steel door. And he began to hear voices, and in order to deal with those voices, he started rhythmically pounding his head against the wall. He was not medicated at the time. He was not getting therapy. A guard came to him and said, "Stop pounding your head against the wall." He continued to pound his head against the wall because he's seriously mentally ill. His first disciplinary report was for failure to follow a direct order. Then he continued to pound his head against the wall and he started bleeding. And some blood splattered out through the little holes to the guard who was outside in front of him. And he got charged with a violent assault. And he got a year in segregation for that. The department referred him out to the Livingston County State's Attorney to be prosecuted for assaulting that officer, but the State's Attorney thankfully declined. But nonetheless, he spent a year in segregation because he was mentally ill and pounding his head against the wall. He wasn't throwing things on people, he wasn't trying to stab somebody, he was pounding his head against the wall and his own blood came out. So even some of those violent assaults aren't really violent assaults. Violation of rules.
Mr. Mills, I know that we've got others that want to
I do.
testify. So
I got 2 examples, all right,
Okay.
very quickly. Crystal Stoneburner at Logan Correctional Center. She was caught with a piece of candy in her pocket. She got 30 days of segregation for that. Nicole Notchke, who was trying to get here today but could not make it, who's now out. Written testimony from her is included in the record. She still has nightmares. She had a seizure at Logan. The guard didn't believe she was having a seizure, so he grabbed her and threw her up against the wall. As she was having a seizure, saliva came out of her mouth and went on the guard. She was charged with an assault, despite having a long history of seizures, which the guards didn't believe, because at Logan they have this theory by the guards that if you're not defecating on yourself or vomiting, then you're not having a real seizure or faking, which has no medical basis whatsoever. But she got a year in segregation for an assault because she had a seizure. That's the violent assaults we're talking about. There's no question there are some people who stab people, and they need to be punished, no question about it. But that doesn't mean that they have to be locked in and tortured for 24 hours a day. Thank you.
do you want me to ask your question? Okay, all right. Do you want some of your witnesses to present?
I do.
Do you have a response?
I do, if you don't mind, just indulge me for one anecdote. To counter a little bit what's being said, I've worked 30 years in this department. I've worked in Menard where there were a lot of assaults. There are people in this room that were there probably when that went on. And I was on the receiving end myself with, an arbitrary, gang-motivated assault. It wasn't because anybody was SMI, it was because they deliberately,
Everybody was
without, I'm sorry, seriously mentally ill. It's burned into my brain. But I really want to point out a recent incident that happened at Lawrence. An officer was assaulted, seriously assaulted, laid out basically he was standing on the walk, watching the line coming out of the dining room. Two guys, two offenders, young guys, which also kind of speaks to the younger generation. They don't think very much about their actions and their consequences. They knew that if they assaulted this guy, they would be transferred somewhere. So without regard for his safety, without regard for anyone's safety, they both brutally attacked this officer and laid him out, and he's still off today. It could have easily killed him. And I don't want to diminish, I don't want it to be unrecognized, the environment that not only offenders are in, but the staff are in, trying to raise their families every day in a facility.
I do want to get to the witnesses. If you could perhaps indicate if the policy changes that you have implemented would have resulted in different outcomes in the cases that Mr. Mills referenced?
Oh, absolutely. That's part of the, we've recognized that for some time now, and that's what we're doing. And these kind of instances, I'm absolutely certain if there was a piece of candy situation, someone got 30 days of segregation, that would not have happened in this administration. It would not have happened.
All right, how about we get to some of our witnesses? Alan, do you have an order that you want to go through?
Yeah,
So state your name for the record.
Hello, my name is Brian Nelson. I work at Uptown People's Law Center. I served 28 years in Illinois Department of Corrections. What nobody's talking about is those of us that did not violate any rules. And I was placed in solitary confinement for 12 years straight under administrative detention. I had no hearing. I had no due process rights. I got no report of why I was there.